Hello, my name is Iwona Mazur, and for the benefit of persons with sight loss who may be watching or listening to this presentation, here is a brief audio description of myself. I am a woman in my early 40s with shoulder-length dark blonde hair, and today I am wearing a bluish shirt. The title of my presentation is Same Film, Different Audio Descriptions on Audience Design and Purpose of AD. My presentation is based within the framework of a functional approach to AD, the basic tenets of which I have described in an article which has appeared recently in the Journal of Audiovisual Translation. However, here is a brief overview of the basic principles. So the approach is based on a classification of multimodal text types for AD purposes, and the classification includes informative, narrative, expressive, persuasive, and entertaining text types. And the model also assumes a functional analysis which has three layers: the contextual, the macrotextual, and the microtextual. The results of those analyses help us determine the so-called functional priorities in a given multimodal text, which then impact the selection of audio description strategies. In addition, there are three rules of functionalism which I have adapted for AD purposes, and these are the Scopus rule, the coherence rule, and the fidelity rule. According to the Scopus rule, AD should be determined by its purpose. The coherence rule states that AD should be both internally coherent as a text and coherent for the target audience. And finally, the fidelity rule states that there should be intrasemiotic coherence between the source text and the audio description. And those rules stand in a hierarchical order, with the Scopus rule predominating. Today, I would like to focus on the purpose and the target audience of audio description. I don't want my discussion to be purely hypothetical, so I based it on previous research by a dear colleague of mine, Ania Jankowska, who conducted process-based research involving 12 audio describers, Polish and Spanish, whom she asked to describe 11 clips. And she recorded the process of the description using, among other things, the so-called think aloud protocols. So the describers were supposed to name whatever or narrate whatever they were thinking at the time of describing. And what transpired from the results was that there was practically no contextual and no microtextual analyses conducted by the describers. So they just sat down and described a given clip. And also there was very little reflection on the purpose and the target audience of AD. There was some reflection on the target audience, but not too much. And now I would like to show you one of the clips that Ania used, and which she has kindly made available to me so that you can better understand what is to follow. So this is a clip from a Polish film called Żółty Szalik, which is Yellow Scarf in English. And in this film, we follow the story of an alcoholic. We see him over a few days leading up to Christmas. And then for Christmas, he comes over to his mother's and spends Christmas Eve with her. So this is the scene.
Żyj długo i w spokoju.
Ty też żyj długo i w zdrowiu. Boże mój, dajmy się uciszyć. Pomódlmy się. Proszę.
O nie. Przepraszam, ale nie dam rady.
No chociaż jeden kawałek.
Nie wyobrażałem sobie, że można tyle zjeść.
Smakowało ci?
Po prostu pyszne.
Cieszę się.
So just a brief AD for the visually impaired target audience. So in this clip, we saw an older woman and a middle-aged man who first share a wafer and exchange Christmas wishes, and then they say a little prayer, and then they share a meal which is very abundant. There are a lot of dishes on the table which are depicted in a close-up, and the dishes are very elaborate. And now, the Polish describers did not have any problems with describing the scene, with deciphering the dishes. However, the Spanish describers really struggled to name all of those dishes. So here you have one of the think aloud protocols. Red soup. This is strange. Onions, peaches in syrup, and black pudding. I have no idea. Here's another one where this jelly thing on the table was considered to be cabbage and minced meat, which is not correct, because you should know that all the dishes during the Christmas Eve in Poland are vegetarian. So this was wrong, right? This description was not correct. And now, had those describers performed a brief contextual analysis, the description or the description process could have looked different. It could have been easier for them. So here you have a passage from a Wikipedia entry on Christmas in Poland. And in this one short paragraph, you have all of the dishes that were there on the table named and also described, and there were also accompanying pictures for them. So you have carp in aspic, you have beetroot soup with uszka, which are ravioli, you have makowiec, which was the black pudding, so it was dessert actually, etc. This would probably have made deciphering dishes much easier for the Spanish describers. However, the question is, are all of those dishes relevant for the Spanish audience? And in order to answer this question, I would like now to move from the experiment that Ania Jankowska did and focus on the film as a text, the whole film as a text. The Spanish describers did not have access to the other scenes in this film. It was an experimental setting where they just described this particular scene. Now, I think we should look more holistically at this particular scene, which will be more ecologically valid, I think. So here we have a narrative text type. This is a film. So the primary purpose will be to relate the story that we see on screen for the blind audience. The purpose of this particular scene is to show the contrast between this scene and the previous ones, which depict the normal life of this character who goes on a drinking binge before Christmas. There's a lot of glass, there is hardly any food that he eats. The colors are bluish and grayish. The montage is rather abrupt, which conveys the chaotic life that he's leading. Whereas this scene is very peaceful, it's very serene, it's very colorful. There is an abundance of food. There is slow music in the background, which, by the way, is one of the famous Polish Christmas carols. There is the Christmas tree, etc. So these would be the functional priorities for this particular scene, to convey the feelings of warmth, of a family home, of being peaceful and serene. However, I think those functional priorities would have to be conveyed differently for the two target audiences, the Spanish and the Polish. I think for the Polish audience, it would be essential to name all of those dishes with which the audience would be definitely familiar, because they are very famous in Poland, and they would bring immediate associations of being at home, being home for Christmas, and of those feelings of warmth and family time. Whereas on the other hand, I think those particular dishes would not bring any associations for the Spanish target audience. So those functional priorities would have to be achieved differently. For example, by describing the Christmas tree, by focusing on the connection between the mother and the son, and the abundance of food and the colors, for example. Of course, some of the dishes could be described or could be named, but that would not be the focus of AD. If, however, this was an informative text type, such as a travel program, for example, which was set in Poland during Christmas, then definitely the dishes would have to be named and would have to be described for the Spanish audience. So here we are talking about this purpose of AD and also the functional priorities. So to answer the question posed in the title of the presentation, yes, I think there can be different ADs for the same audience. And to conclude, when describing, we should look at the purpose and audience design, as well as the overall text functions, rather than just describe what we see. And now I would like to refer briefly to one of the themes of this conference, which is translating AD scripts. So if we were to assume that there can be different ADs for the same audience, then we would probably allow for greater intervention on the part of the translator cum describer when translating AD script. So they would have to be adapted more for the purposes of the target audience. And of course, I am aware that normally when scripts are translated, they are adapted for the needs of the target audience by using, for example, different translation strategies. However, I think this degree of adaptation would have to be even greater. And I think it would be akin more to transcreation rather than translation per se. Transcreation is a term from translation studies, which means that you create a new target text based on an existing source text. So here we could talk about transdescription, so creating a new description based on an existing AD script. For example, in Polish in this particular case, and this script would have to be then adapted to the needs and the background knowledge of the target audience according to the purpose of a particular scene. That's it from me. Thank you very much. This is still work in progress, so I very much look forward to your feedback and comments you may have. And here are the sponsors and the partners. And I would like to thank you for your attention. Bye-bye.